Well, hello, free people of the Rocky Mountain region. This is Brandon from freestatecolorado.com with your weekly news roundup for September 16th, 2023. Every week, I take a look at some headlines, news stories, and articles from across our great state, hopefully giving you some information that you may have missed during the week. Well, pour yourself a cup of coffee and let's see what's in the news. This has been an extremely productive week on freestatecolorado.com. Of course, that's your source for any of the articles, links to the news stories that are going to be discussed every week on these weekly roundups. But additionally, I have a new video pretty much every day this week, as well as a new article here. So everything from about getting your comment in for your local Tabor notice. That deadline is coming up next Friday. A really interesting interview with Pam Long on medical freedom. Pam Long is one of the founders of Colorado Health Choice Alliance, so talking about preventing the next pandemic lockdown. 5 Liberty Goals for Activists and Candidates, a great video with Natalie Metten. Really enjoyed that one. An original article I wrote about Colorado ceasefire, who's now getting taxpayer money after electing legislators to the state legislature, getting these people elected. Now they're getting the money back. I'll talk about that one a little bit later. And a video, probably the biggest of the week, lowering your mill levy, step-by-step guide to present to local elected representatives. So freestatecolorado.com is your resource for a lot of liberty activism, some of the events and goings on in our community. Let's go and take a look at some headlines. All right. DenverGazette.com from Jimmy Sangenberger 20 hours ago, so that'd be September 15th. Colorado's Lord of the Flies. We did everything the adults would do. What went wrong? Piggy asks in William Golding's classic novel, The Lord of the Flies. Try as they might, the kids stranded on a remote island could neither act nor govern like adults. Even with their symbolic conch, signifying civilization, democracy, and adults' rules, they still couldn't rise above their base instincts. Such a task proved impossible for children left to their own devices. These days, the political activists who increasingly dominate Colorado governments epitomize our real world modern fly kids. They cannot bring themselves to act like we expect adults to act, choosing instead to engage in performative displays, supplying their own self images while merely solving straw man problems, irrelevant to the genuine issues of the moment. On Wednesday, State Representative Tim Hernandez, a Marxist teacher turned legislator, was sworn in on the State House floor. With his left hand rested atop two books, Hernandez held up his right hand clenched in a fist, a symbol often used by revolutionary socialist movements, rather than the traditional open palm. Then from the podium, he led his new colleagues in a clapping chant. Afterwards, Hernandez proudly tweeted out 4 pictures of his swearing in. Each was just a duplicate image of the same photo, but zoomed in closer and closer on his fist. The spectacle revealed an unwavering fixation on his own self-importance, prioritizing personal image over a sincere sacred oath. Yet his allies were thrilled. Evidently, the legislature has deteriorated into a paltry platform for mere ideological protest, one casting aside established rules and norms just to prove a point. The rules, Ralph shouts in the novel, you're breaking the rules. The response is simple, who cares, is today echoed by Hernandez, who likewise discards the rules of the game. The freshman legislator threw away the significance of the moment, dismissing everything this job is about in pursuit of protest. A legislator's job is to fill certain legal responsibilities while serving the people, not to oppose their chosen euphemisms for capitalism. Yet, like the stranded children on the island, these individuals merely imitate what the adults are supposed to do. Once elected, they seem incapable of transitioning from an activist to a responsible state legislator. So check out this article. Jimmy Singenberger goes on to provide some really interesting analogies between Lord of the Flies and kind of this, breakdown of society, this chaotic situation that we're seemingly experiencing more and more every day, where these established institutions are losing their power. The respect that people have over the government, the media, what have you, is disintegrating. What's going to replace these organizations? Where's the value left as these institutions seemingly fail around us and don't command the respect that they used to. It's definitely a symptom of a larger issue. Where it goes, nobody knows. But it's up to people like us or people like you maybe watching this video to have voice, to stand up and get involved in your local government. So interesting article from Jimmy Singenberger there. Let's go ahead and move on. Thought this one was really interesting from postindependent.com, September 13th, 2023. Garfield 16 school board election canceled. The Garfield 16 school board has canceled their biennial election this year. Previous candidates, Keith Gronweller and Vincent T. Tomalso, were reelected. Lindsay Latham was elected by acclamation. They will serve on the board for 4 more years. The elections were canceled due to there only being 3 candidates and the need to fill 3 positions, which means the board is allowed to cancel the election by statute. The statute, Colorado Revised Statute 15208, 1.5, states that if there are no more candidates than positions that need to be filled by the end of the business day on September 5th, the Board of Education can cancel the elections. So there you go. Just thought that was really interesting because it shows, hey, if you had ran for office, I don't know anybody in Garfield County, but if you're in Garfield County, anywhere else, there might be open positions that you can get involved, run for office, and they didn't even have enough people running to have an election. So how important are these local elections? How important are these local school boards, special districts, and maybe even city council races where it doesn't take much. Just get involved, show up, get your name on the ballot, and hey, you can win that election. So I wanted to point that one out. Check out the coloradosun.com. Left-leaning organization here moving to a nonprofit status they just announced recently. This is from September 10th, 2023. Colorado's long battle over raw milk is re-energized by the food freedom movement. So I think that's good news. This guy's wearing a hat here, make milk raw again. I think food freedom is a great idea. This idea that the government restricts what food can be sold or bought in the name of protecting health, I think is totally ridiculous. Let individuals make their own decisions. All right, here, let's see here. From the peaceful farm east of Pueblo, where yellow sulfur butterflies hover above the fields and the cows seem like they're living their best lives, comes perhaps the most controversial food product in Colorado, raw milk. Selling raw milk, which is not pasteurized or cooked to kill any harmful bacteria, is illegal in this state. And it's one of the most natural foods out there, right? Milk directly from a cow, directly from an animal, natural, organic, and it's illegal. The only way to get it legally is to become one of the owners of a herd of cows or goats, because farmers are allowed to consume their own products. Oh, wow. And the government gives them permission to consume their own products. Wiley, who wears a red cap that says Make Milk Raw Again, has about 250 shareholders, each of whom has signed a bill of sale to become part owner of his herd of 40 milk cows. The shareholders signed contracts specifying that Wiley will care for and milk the cows, and that the shareholders will pay a boarding fee of $57 per month. There is a waiting list, and no one can sign a bill of sale before touring Large Vista Ranch and meeting the cows. Each share comes with 1 gallon of raw milk per week, which shareholders must pick up by driving dirt roads through the sorghum and cornfields of Pueblo County or meeting at the drop-off spots in Colorado Springs. In other words, they really want it. About 1/3 of Wiley's shareholders say they cannot digest pasteurized milk. Some are putting it in the bottles for their babies. All go through the trouble of buying part of a cow herd because they believe raw milk is healthier, providing enzymes they say helps digestion and has a richer, sweet taste. The Raw Milk Association of Colorado maintains that before milk is pasteurized, it is a living, rich food that contains colloidal minerals, vitamins A, C, and B, and enzymes that aid in the digestion and absorption of the milk's sugars and fats. The alteration of foods and their nutrient content over the course of the last century has had long-term negative impact on the ability to maintain optimum human health and definitely worsens or initiates chemical and food sensitivities, the association says. So, very interesting to see this issue coming up. As the article states, Colorado's rules on raw milk are stricter than in any of its 8 surrounding states and most of the West. Well, it's good to see that this issue is getting some attention. I think it's low-hanging fruit for liberty activists, I mean, especially in a very agricultural state like Colorado, to emphasize raw milk as being something the governor supports, as something that I think a lot of state legislators would support, and a lot of people would support. I think it's a great idea. Looking down here, the Colorado Libertarian Party offered to make a deal to help Republicans get elected if they would, among other promises, pledge to support raw milk. The state Libertarian Party vowed it would not run in competitive legislative districts when the GOP candidate agrees to vote to cut taxes and support food freedom, such as raw milk and local meat processing. So, really cool to see this issue gain some traction. It's becoming a political issue. Aaron Lamb, mayor of the Weld County town of Keensburg and a libertarian, said it's time that raw milk policies evolve, arguing that animals raised naturally on small farms are kept clean and treated like pets. Besides, he said, people should have the right to eat what they want. He ran as a leader of the small plains town northeast of Denver along Interstate 76 on a food freedom platform. One of his first acts as mayor was to get the town council to repeal its prohibition on residents selling chicken eggs to their neighbors. There is risk versus benefit to everything in life, he said. If some people think the small risk of illness outweighs the health benefits, I don't think it should be the government stepping in to say, you can't do this. Lamb pointed to data from the Federal for Disease Control and Prevention, which advises against drinking raw milk, indicating about 3% of Americans regularly drink raw milk, yet there are only a handful of outbreaks reported each year. So, very interesting, something you should definitely check out. If you're interested in supporting raw milk or helping to get through the legislature in the coming years, please leave a comment. That's an issue I think I'd be very interested in getting involved in. There's some political traction here, a relatively easy win to help spread some liberty across Colorado. Let's go ahead and move on. I just want to briefly touch on the article I put out this week on freestatecolorado.com/ceasefire. Exposed. Colorado ceasefire elected legislators. Now they're getting taxpayer money. This is from September 12th, 2023. Part of a series on exposing Colorado's political establishment, kind of giving you some behind the scenes look at some of the people involved, some of the where the money's going, and how Colorado's politics is set up the way it is. Colorado's anti-gun lobbyists have seen success in recent years. Storage laws and reporting requirements are now law, and earlier this year, several new anti-gun bills were passed by the legislature. However, their biggest success might be having the state legislature provide them with taxpayer money to fund their organizations. Let's look at how this happened. House Bill 21, 1299. In 2021, anti-gun politicians presented a variety of legislation, including a bill to create a taxpayer-funded anti-gun office in the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, CDPHE. Their bill, HB 21-1299, Office of Gun Violence Prevention, passed the legislature and was signed into law by Governor Jared Polis on June 19, 2021. Tom Sullivan, Jennifer Bacon, Rhonda Fields, and Chris Hansen were the prime sponsors, and unfortunately, they are continuing their anti-gun activism to this day. According to the bill's fiscal note, this bill establishes the Office of Gun Violence Prevention in the Department of Public Health and Environment with the purpose of coordinating and promoting efforts to reduce gun violence. Of course, how to reduce gun violence is a big question for the office to handle. They have plenty of money to figure it out. The office this legislation created was projected to cost taxpayers over $3 million per year. Wow. So this money, $3 million in taxpayer money, is going to a lot of things. One of the things it's going to is a $450,000 grant program. So there's over 29 different organizations currently getting this money, this taxpayer money, and some of these groups are providing trigger locks, gun safety training, mental health services. Not very controversial stuff if you think of it that way. Of course, I don't think it should be supported by taxpayer money, but nonetheless, nothing too crazy. However, there is one group, Colorado Ceasefire, that has a history of funding anti-gun candidates and lobbying for anti-gun legislation. So I put a little graph here, a little image at the bottom of the post here. Colorado Ceasefire spends thousands to elect legislators over the past 2 decades. Then legislators pass this House bill establishing this grant program. And now Colorado Ceasefire has given over $26,000 in the grant money just this year. So clearly, in my mind, this organization is getting some payback from electing some bad guys and now they're getting a slice of the pie. Of course, Colorado Ceasefire will be able to maintain their organization, pay for staffing, keep their efforts going now that they're getting some taxpayer money. I'm sure it's going to make it easier for them to continue their anti-gun activism. So gun violence prevention office should be shut down, of course, and at the very least, Colorado Ceasefire should be removed from one of the organizations that's being funded by this taxpayer money. Let's go to move on here. Another big issue this week, put out a video with Natalie about this, but I wanted to revisit her article here. This Friday, coming up here on September 22nd by noon, it's time for you to get in your comments on local Tabor ballot measures for the 2023 ballot. You got to check this video out on freestatecolorado.com where Natalie explains how this process works. It's very important. There's not a lot of time left, but thankfully, the Colorado Taxpayer Bill of Rights allows for a local ballot issue notice. This guide is sent by mail at least 30 days before the election to all households with one or more registered voters. The ballot issue notice includes content and details about upcoming ballot measures that increase taxes, add debt, or suspend Tabor revenue limits. It includes a section where registered voters have the opportunity to submit for or against comments with up to 500 words each. So you got to check this out. You can find out what's going to be on your ballot by reading this article, giving you the tools, preparing for your comments to submit to the local elected people, and then what my comments are ready. What else do you need to include? There are some key points to remember here, some rules. So you got to read this article, get this to the designated election official, and get involved because this is a great way, a very simple, easy, free way for you to have a voice in your community, to be able to reach nearly every voter in your local community on these Tabor ballot initiatives. So check out this article. It's really important, and I think this should be something that the Liberty community here in Colorado focuses on every year. Well, let's go ahead and move on. From the denvergazette.com, of course, homelessness is an issue that is not going away anytime soon. Major issue that's seemingly only getting worse in many circumstances. September 14th, 2023. Shell game won't help Denver's homeless. From the Gazette editorial board. Looks like freshman Mayor Mike Johnston is all in on his ambitious pledge to take 1,000 people off of Denver streets by year's end and house them so that, technically speaking, they won't be homeless anymore. The price tag, as reported by the Gazette, about $52 million. That's the upshot of a news conference this week in which Johnston sought to assure the press and public that City Hall has the money. Too bad it will go to waste, because of course the plan will fail. That's not to say it can't be done, but what's shaping up as the mayor's approach certainly won't do it. Merely moving the city's habitual street dwellers around like some sort of shell game isn't doing them any favors. And that's even for those who agree to lodge in one of the mayor's micro communities. As we noted here just recently, if Johnston really wants to succeed, he must defy the conventional wisdom of progressive polls and policy advocates in addressing homelessness. He has to face up to what keeps much of the hardcore homeless population on the streets. Not a lack of opportunity, bad luck, or an unfair economic system, but addiction. The mayor's elaborate plans to replace illegal homeless camps around the city with supervised temporary quarters, from motel rooms to city-run camps of pallet shelters, lack the one provision essential to getting the homeless back on their feet. There's no screening for addiction or mental health issues, and no requirement for treatment prior to placing people into housing. It's part of a housing first philosophy, a dead end. If spending on such folly actually worked, Denver would have spent its way out of homelessness many times over by now. City Hall spent $152 million addressing the issue in 2022 and has authorized fully $254 million for 2023. When former Mayor Michael Hancock took office a dozen years ago, spending on homelessness was at $8 million. Wow. So, of course, Denver throwing more money at the issue without addressing the underlying causes, as the Gazette points out here, is pretty much doomed to fail. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of solutions out there that are easy. I mean, these are tough questions, these are tough situations, and I can't help but mention that the disintegration of civil society, the traditions and norms of our culture, in terms of the destruction of the family unit and faith communities and other social communities that kept people together and provided a social safety net. So much of that has disappeared in this post-COVID world. And it's really unfortunate to see people falling off the cliff, people becoming homeless, getting addicted to drugs and alcohol, and ending up in a situation where they need help, but maybe they're not necessarily getting it. So let's move on. A couple more articles here. Complete Colorado, page 2, definitely a website you should be checking every day, completecolorado.com. Wonderful news aggregator to provide you with really good information about everything that's happening. Their original reporting on page 2 is almost always very interesting. This is a report finds Denver public schools using left-wing political litmus test in teacher hiring. Now, this is one of the biggest articles, or one of the most interesting, groundbreaking, biggest articles out there that I've seen from Complete Colorado Page 2 in a while now. Really interested in this one. September 14th, 2023, Sherry Pife. Denver. A newly released report shows that only teacher candidates who bow to far left progressive political ideology are likely to be hired by Denver Public Schools, DPS, based on the rubric used during interviews, which was obtained by the report's authors through a Colorado Open Records Act request. Wow. According to the report put out by the National Opportunity Project, NOP, in August, DPS says that qualified candidates, quote, will have an anti racist mindset and will work to dismantle systems of oppression and inequity in our community. Wow. So there you go, folks. I mean, talk about structural issues with an organization. The fact that Denver Public Schools requires a mindset that is very politically and ideologically driven. That has nothing to do with educating children to make them successful in life, but instead focuses on this entire ideological framework to push this whole philosophy on children, on small children. Another sample question used in the interview rubric by DPS included, do you think the classroom is an appropriate place to discuss race, culture? If so, what do those discussions look like? Quote, we had been hearing complaints from parents across the country saying things in my school are out of whack. They just don't seem right, said Daniel Schur, NOP senior legal fellow, during a Tuesday interview on the Mandy Connell radio show on 850 KOA. So we did a very basic thing and filed public records requests and said, show us what application materials, what questions you ask, show us what criteria you use when you're hiring teachers. Schur pointed out this basic question can be asked by any parent in any school district. Definitely encourage parents to get more involved in the school districts. It's not the same schools you went to when you were a kid. Unfortunately, these schools are totally political organizations designed to push a specific worldview on the students. What NOP found out, according to Sir, was that rather than hiring for excellence, a lot of school districts are prioritizing ideology and politics, including DPS. Gosh, I mean, it's not too surprising, of course, because every news story, every week we see there's a news story about these schools and how authoritarian they become, how left-leaning, how ideologically driven they become, and of course, how the students are suffering. The students are missing their standards. They're not able to read and write and do math at grade level. Majority of them are not able to do that in Colorado. Of course, the teachers are focusing on things that don't have to do with reading, writing, or math. The only other Colorado school district that had the records requested was Jefferson County Public Schools. Jeffco provided responsive records, but was not among the 23 districts found to be using ideological hiring practices. Well, that's good. I was shocked, quite honestly, Schur said. As a lawyer, this seems not only wrong, but illegal. The First Amendment protects all of us and our right to hold our beliefs about politics and about faith, and that the government can't discriminate against us based on our political beliefs. So you got to check that out. That is a very interesting article, very shocking, but obviously not surprising, but nonetheless a perfect example of how extreme things have gotten in government schools here in Colorado and how important it is for parents to seek alternative education programs such as homeschooling and getting our kids out of some of these schools. Let's move on. KDVR.com. September 14th, September 15th updated. RTD bus stabbing suspect linked to 2 killings near Regis University. So you probably saw this in the news. I just want to point it out because, RTD is what so many of these politicians are trying to push Coloradans into using, but it's not safe. It's not a place that you want to send your kids on. It's not a place you necessarily want to be. I mean, this is during the day in Denver. Police say the suspect in a deadly stabbing on an RTD bus Thursday is also connected to a second stabbing death later in the morning at a bus stop near Regis University. This guy was arrested on North Lowell Boulevard, the Denver police said, just after 3:45 p.m. He faces 2 counts of first-degree murder in the killings of a 51-year-old man in an RTD bus and an older woman near the Regis University campus. Both victims were stabbed in the neck. Yikes. I mean, this guy has been, if you read the article and others on this guy, I mean, he's been out of prison so many times over the past several years for stuff you'd think he'd still be locked up for. Of course, that is a big issue. But nonetheless, here we go, 5 in the morning. So many people going to work probably. RTD bus, 32nd and Federal. Uneventful ride until the suspect boarded at 5:08 a.m. near 32nd and Federal. The bus driver told police the suspect got on the bus and paid $5, saying he couldn't find his bus pass according to the arrest warrant. Still, the driver gave him a $6 day fare. Surveillance video shows what happened according to the arrest warrant. He then walked directly to the back of the bus and immediately, without provocation or warning, began stabbing the victim in the left side of the neck with an object in his right hand. Wow. So, here he goes, walks on the RTD bus, stabs somebody to death, and then gets off the bus and stabs somebody else to death. I mean, absolutely horrific, absolutely terrible. Not only is this showing what's going on in Denver, but of course, RTD and the failures there. I mean, you're putting your life at risk if you take the bus, it seems. Let's go ahead and move on. Axios.com, September 11th. Talked about this last week, but just want to briefly mention it again and show another article on this issue. Colorado business leaders feel pessimistic about economy. Well, no surprise there, of course. Most important issues facing Colorado businesses, according to local leaders. Survey of 156 business leaders conducted June 26 to July 28, 2023. Regulations 49%, available workers 11%, housing 8%, inflation 6%, and taxes 3%. Wow. Colorado's escalating cost of living and increasing regulatory burden on business is souring the economic mood. 60% of business leaders say the state's economy is on the wrong track compared to the national picture, according to a new survey conducted by research firm CHS and Associates on behalf of the Colorado Chamber of Commerce. The results echo other business confidence ratings and send a strong signal to Democratic leaders who control the state House about their aggressive overhaul of labor, environmental, and privacy regulations, the three most burdensome areas the survey found. So this is an important issue, of course, going forward. As we've seen, we have Marxists and left-wing radicals serving in our state government, of course, pushing anti-business, anti-capitalist legislation. Fortunately, some of the more moderate Democrats have been able to stop most of it, but will be interesting to see what happens going forward and how the business community responds. Let's move on. RealClearMarkets.com. Have to talk about Tabor, the Taxpayer Bill of Rights, one of the most valuable things we have politically here in Colorado, and of course with the very, very bad Proposition HH on the ballot this year. Colorado tries to sneak one under the Tabor. September 12th, 2023, Andrew Wilford. Colorado is unique in having the strongest protections against misuse of taxpayer money in the country in the form of its Taxpayer Bill of Rights, Tabor. But while its protections have steadily whittled away over the years, a ballot measure set to appear before taxpayers in November could make Tabor's condition terminal. Generally speaking, Tabor requires excess revenue to be refunded to taxpayers and necessitates direct taxpayer approval for tax increases. Unsurprisingly, that's proven to be a substantial nuisance to legislators intent on pushing tax and spend policies. It's not a perfect shield. The most common workaround in Colorado is to inaccurately designate tax increases as new fees that do not require voter approval. Even so, it generally prevents overt tax increases from getting taxpayers without their knowledge and consent, a distinction few other states can claim. But no such finagling with the English language can prevent taxpayers from receiving Tabor refunds. That's why this November, the state Democrats are taking a shot at using clever formulation of a ballot measure question to mislead taxpayers about what they're actually voting on. Proposition HH would essentially require local governments to deduct $50,000 off of homeowners' home value assessments for property tax purposes. For example, a home assessed at $350,000 would only owe property tax on $300,000 in home value. But Proposition HH would then use the funds that would have gone towards Coloradans' Tabor refunds to pay local governments for the lost property tax revenue. In essence, it's a shell game. but one that results in Tabor being fatally weakened. A study by the Colorado based Common Sense Institute estimated that households would lose $5,119 in foregone Tabor refunds, an amount exceeding the benefit of reduced property taxes. What's more, while the law only lasts a decade, it can be extended by the state legislature with no subsequent voter approval. None of that is clear in the text of the ballot measure Coloradans will be voting on. So, of course, one of the most important issues politically this year is stopping Proposition HH. It is an absolute attempt to take away our taxpayer Bill of Rights tax money refunds and grow the size of government. It is a tax increase. Do not be mistaken on that, and please get the word out. Well, let's move on here. One more editorial here from the Denver Gazette on the growing rift in Colorado's left from September 12th, 2023. Of course, this Tim Hernandez guy has been in the news a lot for being openly Marxist, fist-raising Marxist who's who's now in office, appointed, of course, not elected, but appointed. The late conservative icon, Irving Kristol, memorably quipped that a neoconservative, i.e., a reformed leftist like him, is a liberal who has been mugged by reality. Kristol, who came of age amid the economic upheaval of the Great Depression in 1930s New York City, emerged from college as a member of the Young People's Socialist League. He even identified as a Trotskyite. Remember Leon Trotsky, the one-time Bolshevik who was too far left to the left even for Soviet dictator Joseph Stalin? What a difference a little time can make. By Kristol's death at 89 in 2009, he was one of the reigning patriarchs of the American right. Which isn't necessarily to say every left-wing firebrand on campus today is tomorrow's button-down conservative, but Kristol's observations does provide perspective and for some telling survey findings about Colorado reported in the Gazette this week. The survey was jointly scripted by Democratic and Republican pollsters for the Colorado Polling Institute. Its findings reflect, among other things, the impact of young, educated, politically left-leaning newcomers to the Front Range. The data underscored how the emergent left has helped Democrats come to dominate state politics over the past several election cycles, yet also has served to divide Democrats themselves into two increasingly distinct camps. And while the survey was conducted in Denver, whose electorate is decidedly to the left of much of the rest of Colorado's, the findings have implications statewide. Notably, Colorado's noisy new left, with a growing presence in the legislature as well as in local governments, is on a collision course with the state's long dominant mainstream. On no issue that is more apparent, the survey found then on how to address homelessness on the streets of the state's metro areas. The poll found it's a top issue among most of those surveyed, but that there's a sharp divide over how to respond as a matter of public policy. It might even amount to a litmus test of sorts. Perhaps not surprisingly, most survey respondents support sweeps by local authorities that shut down rampant illegal camps of street dwellers in parks, along sidewalks and other public spaces. However, as the overview accompanying the poll noted, the only groups who oppose continuing sweeps are voters ages 18 to 29 and socialists, while older Democrats very strongly favor the sweeps. Interesting. So one of the issues out there about the sweeps and homelessness, but I think the divide in the Colorado Democratic Party is only growing, will continue to grow, and it'll be very interesting to see what opportunity this presents for those of us who believe in liberty and freedom. So something to keep an eye on, especially going into the 2024 legislative session. Two more articles here. Again, Denver Gazette. Oh my gosh. This one, if Colorado, Denver, come on. They're making it harder for people to be driving. Of course, this whole Vision Zero idea of no civilian deaths or no pedestrian deaths, excuse me, in Denver is kind of a pipe dream that they've been pushing for so long. So, of course, what do they want to do? Make it much more difficult to drive in Denver, such as banning right turns on red in Denver. Absolutely, absolutely terrible. If Mayor Mike Johnston listens to his transition committee on transportation, Denver could become another in a growing list of cities to ban right turns on red in certain areas. The practice of turning right when a traffic signal is red dates back to the 1970s, excuse me, when an oil crisis pinched drivers at the gas station. Until the 1970s, basically right turns on red were banned everywhere. And then during the oil crisis of the 1970s, somebody got the idea that it could help save on gas. The federal government picked up on this idea and actually started coercing states into legalizing right turn on red by withholding money from states until they did so. The research has shown that practice doesn't save as much gas as anticipated, but it did immediately show that right turns on red are dangerous for people outside of cars. It's pretty ridiculous to think that people who are driving to work, people who are just trying to get along with their day now have a potential new challenge when they're in Denver. I mean, for one, it's unenforceable. It's only going to lead to more police encounters, of course, which you'd think the left would oppose, and it's only going to disproportionately affect people, in working class communities. But nonetheless, let's just move on. See the last article of the week from KDVR.com, Fox 31. Lamborn, House Freedom Caucus not being very reasonable. I just thought this one was interesting. Of course, some of the news about federal politics this week is about the looming federal shutdown. I say shut it down. We don't need this federal government that's too expensive, unaccountable, and so wasteful. Shut it down. Of course, Doug Lamborn, among other legislators, is on the side of funding the government. And it's very unfortunate to see that Lamborn saying that the House Freedom Caucus is being too unreasonable. I want to bring this up because it's one of those issues out there that, it shows the separation from the Republican base to the Republican congressman like Lamborn. The base wants action. They want something to happen. They see the abuses of the federal government, and they see a lot of these Congress people not doing anything about it. And unfortunately, Lamborn thinks it's more important to fund the government than to actually stand up for the people of Colorado. To the article, Congress has until the end of September to pass a funding measure in order to avoid a government shutdown. U.S. Rep. Doug Lamborn called it a 50-50 proposition. Those that think they're not going to those that think they're going to get something out of it, a shutdown, they're going to be sadly mistaken, the Republicans said this week. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy came to an agreement with President Joe Biden back in May. The House Freedom Caucus members have vowed not to support that deal unless their demands are met. Those demands include cutting spending to $120 billion less than what was agreed upon to a 2022 level of $1.47 trillion. The group of about 40 House Republicans also vowed not to support a measure unless it cracks down on southern border crossings, addresses what they call the weaponization of the Justice Department, FBI, and ends so-called woke policies at the Pentagon. Lamborn says he agrees with those demands. I think 95 to 100% of the Republicans in the U.S. House agree with those same goals. But Lamborn is Colorado's only Republican lawmaker on Capitol Hill who is not part of the House Freedom Caucus. He said it's been difficult to negotiate, though, because people keep moving the goalpost on you as you try to march down the field. Lamborn said despite the House Freedom Caucus saying they don't want a government shutdown, the group will, quote, achieve the things they say they don't want because they're not being very reasonable, end quote. So I just wanted to bring this up because I think it's such an important issue in Colorado politics. There's so much, as we've seen in previous article, controversy in the Democratic Party. So the split, it's the same thing's been going on in the Republican Party for even longer. As I thought this was pretty telling here, where Lamborn agrees with those demands. He agrees with what the House Freedom Caucus wants. However, he doesn't necessarily want to support them or doesn't necessarily want to dive into that because you got to be reasonable. So it's just so unfortunate to see these Republican leaders, quote unquote, these Congress people who agree with cutting spending, agree with the stopping the weaponization of the Justice Department, agree with ending these woke policies of the Pentagon, but not really willing to do anything about it. I mean, it's a perfect example of where so many of these Congress people are at, unfortunately. So, thank you very much for joining me on this weekly roundup for September 16th, 2023. Every week we'll be back to take a look at some articles and headlines. You can find all of these links at freestatecolorado.com. Really appreciate your time. Hope you have a great day, and we'll see you later.